Welcome to Good Sex at NYU, a podcast about sex, relationships, health, and mental health in a sex-positive space. So if you're looking for sometimes serious, sometimes funny, and always sex-positive discussions, then you're in the right place. I'm Danielle Elliman, Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services at Counseling and Wellness Services. I use she, her pronouns.
And I am April Fellers, a nurse and sexual health educator at the Student Health Center. I also use she, her pronouns. We are two white, cisgender, heterosexual, female-identifying clinicians, one with a medical background and the other with mental health experience, who seek to create a space that is inclusive of all identities, backgrounds, and perspectives. Welcome to Good Sex at NYU. We are delighted to welcome Alexander Pines to the podcast today. Alexander is currently the Assistant Director for Global Diversity Education and Training in the Office of Global Inclusion at NYU, where he develops and facilitates workshops on power, privilege, and identity for faculty, students, and staff across campus. He also works with his colleagues at the Center for Multicultural Education and Programs to support events like Solidarity Week and NYU's cultural graduations. Prior to this role, he worked at NYU's Office of Student Success in the financial education team, directly supporting students and helping them navigate university life. He holds an MFA from the Nonfiction Writing Program at the University of Iowa and a BA in American Studies and Creative Writing from Columbia University. His essays and criticism on monsters, transmasculinity, and American empire have been published in Bomb, Vice, The Rumpus, The Black Warrior Review, and elsewhere. In his spare time, he's probably painting his nails, and I can attest, you all should go on the YouTube and look because these nails are amazing. Alexander, would you like to share your pronouns with our listeners, and is there anything else you think it would be good for our listeners to know before we get started?
Sure, yeah. I use he, him pronouns, and I think my way too long bio with way too long title, OGI, Office of Global Inclusion, it's actually, there's even an even longer version of the office name. It's the Office of Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Strategic Innovation. Yeah. So it's even more of a mouthful than it could be.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you here. Can you tell us just one thing that you like about the NYU community?
Yeah. So I'm gonna cheat a little bit and talk about my coworkers, if that's not too obnoxious. But something I really appreciate, I started in this role last September, and I love coming into work with people who really care and who really, not just about the work, not that caring about your work isn't important, but who really care, like who can, we'll have conversations about like decolonization. We'll have conversations about like whether or not it's right for museums to be like stealing things from people and stuff like that. And it's like, those are the sorts of conversations and things that really enrich kind of my day to day, where it feels like, yes, we're all here. Like, and sometimes the job is really annoying. It's like cleaning glitter off of tables in the lounge, which we did for like hours right before a training for faculty. So it was real embarrassing. Right. It's that, but it's also like, I get to have these like wonderful conversations with people who bring so much of themselves into that space every single day. It's a real pleasure to be around. And I feel like that's something you don't get everywhere. Like my partner who works in tech can't say the word union at work, which is wild. So yeah, that's something I really, really appreciate.
Well, I'm very grateful for your office. I've done lots of the workshops and enjoy all of the people that I've ever met from your office. So I'm glad that it exists and that you are there.
Yeah, we're a fun crew.
Yeah, I've definitely had interactions with your colleagues as well, and it's a great group. So we're going to try to create a safe space for you to answer some questions, but feel free if, one of the questions you want to turn that around on us. We want this to be an equitable space, right? We want you to come in here and feel like you can, share with us what you feel comfortable, but also if there's, a boundary that you want to hold, you can just let us know. And we'll be happy to move on to the next question.
Great. Love it.
So who is your first or current crush? And was it a real person, literary or TV character, a musician?
I have two that I'll give. So the first one, who I don't think I was consciously aware was a crush when I was, until maybe like middle school. I didn't really understand like I just wanted to like marry my cat, frankly. Like I asked my mom when I was like 5, I was like, what's marriage? And she was like, well, this is in like the 90s. She's like, marriage is when a man and a woman love each other very much and they get married. And I was like, cool. The only boy I can tolerate is my cat. So that's who I'm marrying. Great. I'm set. I wasn't really cognizant of like crushes until I got older. But I remember being enamored with Raven on the original Teen Titans, the animated Teen Titans from like the early 2000s. She was really broody. And given that I was like a little emo baby, there was a pattern here. But yeah, I was obsessed with her. And then in middle school, going into, I think, 8th grade, I watched V for Vendetta for the first time with Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't see the movie, but I know her look there. Yes.
Yeah. And you would think that like there is like actually a queer story in V for Vendetta between two women. That wasn't it. No, it wasn't that. That would have been the relevant thing. No, it was just this random moment where like Natalie Portman like wakes up and initially you can't tell she's wearing a tank top, and then it like becomes obvious she is because that makes sense. It wasn't that kind of movie. But my little 13-year-old self was disappointed when I saw the tank top, and something registered, and I was like, oh, this makes a lot of things make sense. And for context, I am a trans man. At the time, I believed myself to be a woman. So it was like, oh, this, everything now makes sense. So I had a huge crush on Natalie Portman circa that particular film.
Is she still a celebrity crush?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I really have celebrity crushes anymore, but certainly she was formative as a kid.
She's a memorable one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Nice. Can you tell us a little bit more about like your journey of personal boundaries and communication skills? Like where did they come from? Like how did you develop those boundaries for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's very much a work in progress. I think maybe not weirdly, but I find I'm much better at communicating and boundary setting in an office setting than I am at home in my personal life. And this is probably something to like unpack in therapy, like why that is, why my professional boundaries are easier to set. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm great at professional boundaries either, but I think because I'm able to kind of very clearly point to like, these are projects that I have done well at, or like I can kind of establish like, this is why I belong and this is why my opinions or my whatever, et cetera, in an office setting matter. It becomes easier for me to like speak up or to, push back on things. I feel more maybe secure in those environments because there's just, I'm thinking where it's performance evaluation season right now, right? So I can I can hold up my thing and say like, see, look, this is why you should listen to me. Whereas in a personal relationship, I don't always feel that confident and that sense of like, if I assert my boundary, this is actually going to be a good thing and it'll be okay. And so it's something that I've been working on increasingly, of trying to just, be a little bit more clear, a little bit more, with friends being like, hey, maybe actually you shouldn't cancel on me 4 times because I've rearranged my life like a bunch of times for you. And this is getting really frustrating. And I feel like I am overly accommodating in personal relationships in a way that like professional me would not be. And so it can sometimes be weird. Like my partner who I've been with for 8 years this August, she's always like shocked when I like describe a work encounter. She's like, you're never like why can you say that to your boss but not to your friend? Like what's going on here? So yeah, I think it's something that's definitely in progress.
I think that's fascinating. Like thinking about like, there is so much highlighting of like work-life balance. And so like some of those, and also like work generally has clear expectations, right? Like this is your job, this is what you're going to do. And like obviously there's, in meetings you get to present things or push back or whatever, but I don't know, I feel like there's so much more of like clear cut boundaries already set in place in work, and it feels okay of like, of course they're not going to ask you to work till 9 p.m. when you're supposed to be off at 5. Like that's unreasonable. And of course, like, and so that is interesting though. I've never thought about that separation though.
Yeah, and then like there are also times where like my partner will have to be like, you need to stop using your work voice. Like,
to you?
Yes.
With her?
Yeah, because I used to, when I was in the Office of Student Success, I was a case manager. And so I was working with students all day, every day. And when you do that for long enough, I think you turn into a person that sees every interaction as a problem to be solved, because that's what I was doing. And this was also at the height of the pandemic. And I was doing it in my house. And so there wasn't that physical, like I get to get on a train, read my book and decompress and then be a human being or a different kind of human being again. It was like, okay, I'm going to, close my laptop and walk into the living room. And she got to a point where she was like, I am not 18. I am not one of your students. I am a big girl. Like you don't need to talk to me, in that like specific kind of patient tone that you use to explain to somebody why they need to go to the bursar. And so that was I was like, oh, right. Having to kind of recalibrate that.
Yeah. I think there's also something about a work environment versus a personal environment where we're sort of taught to not engage our vulnerability or our emotions. And so we turn that off a little bit as much as we can. Sometimes it doesn't work. But I think that's how, like, when you go into like your personal world, like your emotions get turned back on. And like when you add emotion into boundaries, like that can complicate the setting of the consequences of the boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like there's, okay, I have to be professional, my professional self, like I can't be emotional. I have to be like on, right? And then you go into your personal life, like I've just been putting on this mask all day. And now I have to go deal with these like other people that I love and care about. And so it's harder for me to like implement. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's funny too, because like I came out as trans at 19. I wasn't ever really closeted as a queer person. When I came out, it was like, yes, we all know. It was like one of those in high school. And people will say to me like, oh my God, you're so brave. You're so assertive. Like that was such a like big. And I was like, was it? Like I was just trying to live. But it can be weird for me to kind of navigate. I think some people in my life have this impression of me as like this, like very confident, self-assured, because I made a huge decision at 19 and I was not going to let anybody tell me anything about it. I informed people afterward. It wasn't like I called my mom and said, hey, is it okay if, I just called her like, hey, BT dubs, this has happened. And so it can be sometimes weird for me to think like, okay, yeah, at 19 years old, you were able to do that. And yet why is it so hard to negotiate like, maybe I don't have to make a phone call home every so often, or maybe I don't have to do this. Maybe and kind of putting myself first in those, what would think much lower stakes ways. But yeah, it's a process.
Yeah. I think for sure. Also, I was also just thinking when you were saying like, we probably don't love our bosses in the same way that we love our partners or love our friends.
Well, there's power and control in different ways, right? Like our boss has power over our valuation and our income and our job status, whereas like sometimes our family has a lot of power over us in various different ways. But like you can always get a new boss, right? Like you can't get a new parent. Right. Maybe you can get a new, partner, but that's complicated and complex. Right. And so I feel like there's these different power structures that are happening as well that I think complicate how we implement boundaries. I have a workshop called Navigating Healthy Dating Relationships, and we talk a lot about different communication styles and like when you might be more like passive and when you might be more assertive or aggressive. And so sometimes it depends on like those power structures, how you want to engage and how you're like setting the boundaries and communicating. So yeah, I think like the power is always underlying that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Like something I'm thinking about weirdly is like who chooses, what does it mean to choose other people and to choose people in our lives? And, again, like at work, it's sort of like, well, you went through a long process to pick me, we went on like several multi-hour conversations, a whole journey. I had to write things in advance and like that kind of formal, like the way that work relationships are kind of formal or those power relationships do exist. It does feel, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like with personal relationships, it's like there are no consequences if you just stop choosing me. And I think that can be tough to sort of navigate. Or like I moved away from I made some really great friends in graduate school who I love and I would love to be in closer touch with, but we all moved to different parts of the country. And it's like, it's so much harder for me to like choose those relationships because they involve usually getting on a plane, and I don't make that kind of, I don't make like casual weekend jaunt to, New Mexico where some of my friends live, or to Florida money. And so that like as much as there's the power dynamic in a real material sense in a work relationship, there's also this, like, I think, tenuousness to relationships, especially after the pandemic where we've all been separated for so long. That's just been kind of weird and confusing to navigate too.
Yeah. I've always been jealous of the people that could just like move to another place and be like, okay, bye. Those friends were my, that life was that life. And I'm now in this other life and I don't even think about you anymore. And I'm just like, how do you do that? Like,
yeah.
I always think, I feel so guilty that, like, I'm not talking to my friends from college, even though I graduated from college almost 20 years ago. And, like, they don't contact me. Why am I feeling guilty about it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have friends from high school where it's like, we haven't seen each other in a decade. And yet I'm like, every time I'm in the vicinity of the Midwest, I feel this, like, Pavlovian, like, okay, I have to text, this person, this person, this person. Yeah.
I think I'm the opposite of y'all. I think I'm that person who, like, I haven't talked to friends from high school in years and years.
It's just okay.
No guilt at all when I go back there. No, my family's a different story. And I think, like, I may be in contact with one friend from college, but all of my grad school friends are here. So, of course, I'm more in touch with folks from grad school than I was anyplace else because I stayed around in the same place.
Yeah.
I also was in the Peace Corps. And so I went all these, and I have a few Peace Corps friends as well that I'm still in touch with, but I'm like, I would love to be in touch with them, but I think, like, we've also moved and shifted throughout our life. We're so different now. Yeah. So I think that has an impact for me. Not that I'm like, kissing everyone goodbye and I don't care, but I just think, like, 20 years later, like, it's hard to find things in common.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So we've kind of been touching around this, but specifically in sexual and intimate relationships, what role do you feel like communication plays in those settings?
Oh, huge. It's the most important thing. I feel like the number one kind of conflict my partner and I get into, and again, we've been together for a long time, we know each other very well, is feeling like one of us is expected the other one to be a mind reader because, we get tired and we both have kind of stressful jobs and, like, the world has been a nightmare. And so, like, when all of those things tend to happen, I feel like communication is the first thing to go because it's like there are times where I feel like I am just so exhausted. I can barely, like she said to me the other night, she was like, will it be year 9 of being together when you're able to just tell me when you're hungry? Because I go from, like, fine to a monster very quickly.
My husband's the same way.
And, like, sometimes even I don't know when I have crossed that threshold where I will we'll be watching TV on the couch and then I will be a monster. And, like, it's because I'm too tired to, like, even check in with myself enough to be able to say, like, oh, hey, like, we should figure out dinner. Which is the most annoying conversation to have. It's like
every day you have to think about what you're going to eat. It's so annoying.
Yeah, like, as much as I love food, I do understand the, like, Soylent people who are like, no, I'm just going to drink this shake. I'm like, I get it. Like, it's one less decision you have to make. Because I definitely get decision fatigue. But yeah, I feel like it's the most important part of any kind of relationship, and that's really, where I have made mistakes in relationships is consistently where I have just failed to communicate my needs, failed to communicate, like, where I'm at, or not done a good enough job of really listening to what the other person was trying to tell me. I feel like that's where all of the problems lie.
Yeah. Something that you're sort of speaking to is conflict. And I think a myth around relationships is that conflict, doesn't happen, or it shouldn't, or we shouldn't prepare for it. But I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about, like, how you react when there is conflict and maybe some things that you've learned that maybe you wish you would have known a little bit sooner.
Yeah, I grew up in a house where we were all, like, yelling at each other all the time, which was good and bad. There are pros and cons. I think the benefit of that, or what that experience kind of gave me moving into adulthood, was not seeing conflict as a negative inherently, and being comfortable loudly, aggressively disagreeing with people and still feeling secure in my relationships with them. Even if there are things that, I would maybe not, like, disagreements where I'm like, if you weren't related to me, I would not maybe want to keep talking to, especially about politics, with some members of my family. But I felt like that is something I'm actually quite grateful for, because I think it prepared me to coexist with, folks who have maybe very, very strong opinions that I don't necessarily mesh with. And so in that respect, I think I handle conflict maybe less defensively than I would otherwise. I think what I've had to really learn as the conflict has gone from, like, opinions about things that are maybe important but not related necessarily to, like, relationships. So like, big, loud disagreements about movies, big, loud disagreements about politics, which are a different thing, but like still less personal than like big, loud disagreements about like how we want to live our lives, right? That feels, those stakes feel different. What I've had to kind of learn is how to see myself less as like another loud voice that's like sort of jockeying, and be really receptive to feedback and understand and internalize what somebody else is saying about my behavior without turning that into defensiveness. And I think that's been, the most important skill I could have learned in the last 10 years, being able to really listen to somebody and say like, you're not attacking my personhood. I can still be secure in myself, hear this feedback and understand like, okay, this is how my behavior has affected you. And you've explained that clearly. How am I going to make adjustments to that? And so at that, I think, as a younger person, that's what I would like go back and be like, hey, kiddo, guess what? You're not always right. Like, it's okay to be wrong. It's necessary to be wrong. And to learn how to be wrong gracefully, I think is the most, that's like, my work, my day-to-day work is training people how to be wrong gracefully in many ways, because we are all going to, by nature, just being in community with other people, there's going to be conflict, and learning how to embrace that and see that as an opportunity for change and for growth and for getting better and improving, I think is absolutely necessary, especially in relationships. My relationship would not still be here after 8 years if we hadn't had like good productive conflict.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, something else that I'm hearing in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're also not internalizing some of those things. Because I think one of the things that we will often do is when we're in conflict and we're hearing that feedback, we hear that like we've done something wrong and that means that we're bad. And so we internalize that. And I think that's really harmful too. And so to not internalize when you are getting some feedback, it doesn't mean that you're bad. You should take that shame and really sort of think, negative things about yourself. But to be like, okay, I did something that was harmful, but that doesn't mean I'm a terrible person.
Yeah, exactly. I think the difference between like guilt and shame, and this is something Brene Brown, yes, yeah, and like what she says about shame being destructive to the self, and how that can be kind of poison. And I used to sort of, I think you see the like Twitter phrase like white guilt is useless or da da da. I think that's true to an extent. Like the ways in which like white folks are the people who don't hold marginalized identities can kind of weaponize or take up space with their guilt. That certainly is a separate thing. But I think the notion of guilt as a calling to redress.
Be better.
Yeah, I think that is actually a productive emotion, and allowing, like when you're hearing that feedback, allowing yourself maybe to feel guilty in the sense of like, maybe there is a thing I need to do differently, as opposed to those feelings of shame of, I think as people, we will do anything to avoid feeling ashamed. And that's where those feelings of defensiveness or kind of, just rejecting what the other person is saying can really get inflamed. So embrace guilt, I guess.
It sounds like you've come a long way from your childhood, and that would not have happened if you had not embraced that guilt and kind of learned and grown along the way. And it seems like in some trial and error and practice, things have gotten better, and you can reflect back, and it sounds like you really have embraced that piece. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's also like, it's something like, understand, I think this is at NYU, Professor Dolly Chu, her whole thing of, I'm good-ish person, right? Understanding that like you can accept feedback, you can hear things about yourself and say like, I'm not perfect, I'm never going to be perfect, and still striving to be better, and understanding that like you're going to mess up and being okay with that, I think is really, really necessary, because you are going to mess up.
Yeah. No one's perfect. And we just need to strive to be self-aware in the areas where we can have control. Because I think that's another issue that comes up. Like, I don't have control of all these other things, but like I have control of me. And so what areas can I really sort of make improvements on slowly and hopefully steadily along my journey? Yeah.
How do you define and experience intimacy outside of traditional romantic notions of sexual relationships? And can you provide examples of different ways and different types of intimacy in your life?
Yeah. I think like as a queer person, as a trans person, I think there is like already a good deal of self-awareness around, not self-awareness, but like intentional reckoning with the sort of like friendship versus romantic relationship, that kind of binary. Like I think in queer community, or at least in the communities I've been part of, there's a real understanding that like putting all of your expectations for any kind of intimacy on a single human being is not a good idea, and doesn't lead to everybody feeling fulfilled and feeling supported. And so I think being able to just like share like what I'm going through with my friends, or I remember one year, my best friend and I were both single on Valentine's Day, and I was like, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to McDonald's. We're going to get McDonald's. We were poor. We were college students. We had no money. We had McDonald's money. We're going to go to McDonald's. We're going to go to McNally Jackson, and we're going to pick out books for each other. And then we're going to go to this like stupid party. And that's going to be our delightful Valentine's Day. And it was great. I loved it. It was a super fun time. We'd like dressed up and we're like sitting in this McDonald's eating our nuggets, in like suits. Or, little things like, maybe it's silly, but like, like group chats and like just like being able to kind of engage constantly and keep your friends as part of the sort of dailiness of your life. I think that's what happens as you age, right? It's so much harder to have other human beings outside of a significant other kind of go through life alongside you. Yeah. Because it's, we just don't have time. And so what are ways in which you can kind of witness each other, yes, in those big moments or at parties or at celebrations, the sort of structured times that we like think of being with other people, how can we disrupt that a little bit and just have, like I love doing errand friend hangs.
Yes.
Right? Like, hey, I have to go to Target and you live near the Target. Let's hang out and go to Target and then like catch up over coffee, like stuff like that. Like the sort of the mundane, the daily. I think that's where a lot of intimacy happens. Yeah, or like grocery runs. I also love seeing what like people buy. I'm nosy. Don't ever invite me to your apartment. Like I am the worst. But like, ooh, you buy this brand of chips, or ooh, you getting bougie, you're getting this kind of stuff. Like stuff like that. I think is a way to really know people and kind of witness them, for lack of a better word, outside of the context of a traditional relationship.
I also like that you're speaking to the fact that oftentimes we want a partner to be all things. And that's really this misconception, this notion of like culture that says like, oh, our partner has to be our best friend and our soulmate and our, sex goddess or god, like they have to be everything. And that's a lot of pressure. Yeah. But to like have these intimacies with friends and just, again, making it simple. So it doesn't have to be, we have to go to a concert or we have to go, go do something really big and expensive, especially in New York, because everything's expensive. So going, on a, what do you call it? Errand?
Yeah, like an errand friend date.
Errand friend date. That's what it was. Okay. So like those are just ways that you can be in each other's life daily, right? And it's someone outside of your partner, because again, I don't think that you have to have just one person. That's putting all your eggs in one basket. And so it's like, let's like make sure that we're debunking some of those myths as well, that like you need to have other people in your life because your partner can't be all things.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is a very silly example, but like my partner, not a huge fan of Drag Race. She finds competition reality shows stressful, just as I find dating reality shows stressful. And so like when I watch Drag Race, I don't make her watch it with me. I like text my friends who also watched. You know what I mean? It's like that's a very simple thing. But like instead of me being like resentful that my partner never wants to watch Drag Race and it's like, no, I'll just put it on when I'm doing my nails, which I insist on doing once a week anyway. So I have this time carved out. And then I can text people who actually like do enjoy this thing, and I can share that with them instead of, it being this like weird object of resentment in that relationship.
And are those voice text because you're doing your nails? So I feel like
what's happening there? I can't. I use a very quick drying top coat. Okay. And so I can usually like carefully type on my computer because I have the like messages app. Okay. So I'll have like Drag Race up on one screen and then like my crappy like second monitor that's like from 2007 and terrible that I bought like for $50 during COVID. That's where I like can text people.
Okay. It's I was like, system. I had an image. I'm like, you're gonna ruin your nails.
But I also feel like that speaks to what we were talking about before, that like when you text your high school friends, those relationships are not anywhere close to what your friendships are here in New York, because they're just not seeing you on that day to day. And you spend your hour and you have coffee with them talking about meaningless, superficial stuff of like, oh, this is what my job is. These are a few fun things I've done. And it's just not the same as like what's actually going on in your life and like what you're struggling with or what you like are really joyful about these days. And there's just so much you miss in the day to day if you aren't actually living life alongside people. And you just can't share that in an hour at a meal or coffee.
Yeah. I mean, that's what made I did long distance for 3 years as a graduate student, and it was almost impossible. I mean, we did break up my like last semester of graduate school. We got back together a few months later after I graduated, but it was just like, I felt like I can't be present here. I moved to Iowa. So I can't be present in Iowa with, going through this wild, graduate school in general is wild, but like art school where everyone's a writer, the pettiest kind of people on the planet. And like your dentist is a writer, your barista is a writer. Everyone in this town of 30,000 is a writer. I couldn't fully be present in that experience and also be present for my partner. And she was really frustrated with me because she was like, yeah, like I feel like it's pulling teeth to get you to call me once a week. And that's not a big ask. And it wasn't a big ask, but I felt so split because I couldn't fully be back in New York. I couldn't fully be in Iowa. And it just was a disaster. I was terrible. I was a terrible boyfriend for 3 years. I'm not proud of it. But yeah, I think that's something that makes long distance just so challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a relationship you really cared about and wanted to succeed.
Yes.
So think about all these other relationships you're kind of like, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what are some of the dominant messages that you grew up with about sex and relationships, and how did they really shape your perspective on them now?
Yeah, so I don't know what it was about my childhood. First, I managed to avoid, fortunately, internalizing a lot of like really negative messages about like queer and trans people for I think a couple reasons. One, there just weren't any messages about trans people, so it was like cool. This is a void, but at least it's not a negative void. Although no, there were some messages. I'll get to those. But like, I felt like I didn't have, and maybe this is because I didn't frankly grow up in a religious community. I felt pretty confident. Like when I was younger, it was like, okay, cool. I'm going to marry the cat. I'm just going to live alone with this cat. And then it was like, oh no, I have this debilitating crush on my best friend. Like every lesbian seems to go through. So I did that for a bit. And I felt very grateful that I didn't feel this sort of sense of shame about my identity because so many people I knew did. And that was something they really struggled with. What I think did not mess me up, but I did end up internalizing was the little smidgen of queer media I did have was the L word. And I love the L word. Like I can quote it at length. I have seen every episode many times. I own it on DVD and still own it on DVD because they changed the music in the first season. So if you go on streaming and try and watch that first season, the music is wrong. It's not. And I insist, like my partner will tell you this, I made her watch it on DVD. And like I put it in my PlayStation because that was the only way we could make it.
I was going to say, I'm impressed that you still have a DVD player, but PlayStation makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. But I think something in that, like that vision of queerness and of queer womanhood, there are many people smarter than me who can deconstruct how problematic it is. But basically, if you haven't seen the show, it's a bunch of incredibly wealthy, almost exclusively white, thin, skinny, women in West Hollywood. And to me, that was what queer womanhood was. And as, I was white, but everything else really was not on the table, right? As an adolescent, I felt really, I was like, I don't see myself in that world for many, many reasons. And there was a trans character on the show, and I had been sort of, I don't like the phrase struggling with my gender identity because I think it like casts transness as this like affliction that people suffer from. And I don't really believe in that narrative. But I had been questioning, certainly, my gender identity, and I was not comfortable in it as an adolescent. And then out of the void, there's this trans masculine character who was played by a trans masculine performer, but they just didn't treat this character with any kind of love or, it's pretty horrifying actually going back and rewatching. And the character basically like takes testosterone and turns into a monster. And he loses all of his relationships. Like he'd been in a relationship with one of the kind of main characters and she just starts cheating on him. And like, anyway, so I was like, oh, so if what really stuck with me is this conversation he has with this character who's very much a sort of like voice of reason character. And she's like, whatever, what's going on with all of our strong butch women? Like, why are you betraying, right, yourself in doing these things? And as somebody who at the time saw myself, I was a queer rights advocate. A really formative experience for me was volunteering with this queer rights organization and like working in politics and going canvassing and going door to door and like being part of the queer community in my hometown and really seeing myself as like, yeah, I'm a lesbian, I'm a this, like finding a lot of empowerment and safety in that. having these characters really reject him, that I definitely, that gave me pause. I felt like in some ways that being a trans man was part of being like the enemy. And that's a narrative you see today. You see like J.K. Rowling, that's her, one of her many long screeds is basically like, well, these young girls are transitioning because they're afraid of sexism, and they're gender traitors, basically. And I don't think that's true. I don't don't think that I transitioned and went through all the trouble of transitioning just because I couldn't handle people, acting misogynistically at me.
Because for centuries, like, women have put up with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, I think that you could hold that and figure that out.
Yeah, I think I could have handled it.
Yeah.
And also, like, the weird patronizing way that you insist that trans men are still women is also, like, kind of misogynistic. And, like, denying people bodily autonomy, which, anyway. But, like, that I definitely, like, it made it really hard to come out. And I think that was part of why I didn't come out until I knew trans people. I knew one of my closest friends in high school is transmasculine and non-binary. And I like watched them come out. And I was also like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with what you have to deal with. But then moving to New York for college and kind of starting over, I didn't know anybody in the city besides like a couple family members. That was really freeing for me because I was so scared that this community that really meant a lot to me would completely reject me as a transmasculine person. And it is something that I still, there are these sort of narratives of like, what does it mean to be like a good queer or a good trans person? And, I sometimes feel stuck because it's like, well, I exist in a way that I'm not perceived to be trans. I benefit greatly from that, right? Like, I talk about it as like cis-passing privilege, right? I'm perceived by pretty much everyone as a cisgender man. And while that gives me great security and safety, and it means that I don't get harassed at the airport, I don't get harassed when I'm just trying to live my life, it also means that I'm no longer sort of visibly part of this community that means a lot to me. And when I go into those spaces, I do feel uncomfortable, not because I'm, not because we don't all have the same interests or anything like that, but because I'm like, I don't want you to look at me and see like danger. I don't want you to perceive me as a cis man in these spaces. And so that can be hard, I think, to navigate, especially as somebody who's in a relationship. Even though my partner and I both identify as queer, we're perceived to be we're in a straight passing relationship. And so like we don't go to like pride things, in part because neither of us are big drinkers and I don't like crowds and like the corporate whatever. I can get corporate pride is a whole other thing. But like we don't tend to go to those sorts of spaces. And I think part of that is my own feelings of discomfort because I remember being that 15-year-old kid and like seeing all of these people react specifically to Max in that way.
Yeah. I think that resonates. I imagine with a lot of other trans men. I can only speak for a friend that I had from DC that really struggled for a long time deciding to transition because he was thinking similarly, like he was like, am I giving up this right to fight for women's rights if I now am a man? And like he also was attracted to cis women, and so he was sort of like, well, now I'm going to be a straight man. And so like it's interesting that LGBTQ is sort of this bubble lump of everybody, and his identity as a lesbian is now no longer his identity. And, like all of these things that he was kind of just struggling with these new identities and like wanting to feel aligned with his gender, but also recognizing like, I'm no longer going to be able to be in those spaces, like you said, and I've spent so much of my life like wanting to fight for women's rights, and I can still do that. But what does that look like now as a man? So I think it's
messy.
Yeah.
It's real messy. I mean, like, and again, my prior relationship was not one that was perceived to be straight. When I was in college, my then partner was also transmasculine. So it was like, I've been called every anti-gay slur you can imagine, which is another like real, to go from getting like catcalled and yelled at in high school by being perceived to be a queer woman, dating another queer woman, and then going to college and being perceived as two gay men, and how that was also a head trip. Yeah. And then to like land at the end of that in a relationship that is perceived to be straight is also just wacky. And
how do you like it's in your head too? Like also thinking about like I've had friends that were two gay men and one transitioned and is now like the one that's still a cis man is sort of like they are no longer romantically engaged because he's like, I'm a gay man and you're no longer a man.
Yeah.
And, and it's just lots of things to think about.
Yeah, I mean, that was a conversation my partner and I had when we first started dating because she used the term like lesbian to refer to herself, which and this was when I was much younger, I really was like, like, I don't like that because there are, getting into the like interpolitics of the queer community is a long conversation, but there is a way in which I think there are that masculinity, especially like a certain kind of like white masculinity is fetishized and really held up in certain queer women's spaces, like thinking about at women's colleges, for example, or historically women's colleges. I remember shortly after I started college, there were these articles about Wellesley and this this trans guy who was like in student leadership at Wellesley, and the sort of way it talked about the social dynamics of how his masculinity was so prized and again held up. And so there are a number at the time, especially there were a number of like queer women who would be like, I'm a lesbian, but I'm attracted to this trans man, and like that sort of like seeing him as like not really a man, just like a really masculine woman, and like so that I felt sort of rendered invisible or rendered unseen by that, even though of course at this point I had been like I started my transition several years prior to my partner meeting me. She did not ever know me pre-transition. So I knew that consciously that she wasn't like seeing me as a woman, but it still felt really invalidating. And so we had to have a conversation about language. And now I feel I'm, much more secure in my relationship. And also I'm like, I don't care what you call yourself. It's like it's not my place to tell you how to identify. And, I think it was presumptive of me to have that conversation with you back when we were like 21. But it is something that like came up and like, thinking about like these relationships in the queer community and the labels that we use and how, what that broadcasts to the other person about who they are anyway.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like also with different spaces in fighting for women's rights, I think it's also, you said something about like feeling safe, right? And so I think like I think in the movement, we think about like wanting more men as to be part of the journey, to be part of the fight, because it shouldn't just be a woman's fight, but like you show up as, a white cis, person, and how that's like a little bit of like, is this person safe? And so I really resonated with that. And it's like, I try to, we got one in, but I think like just sort of remembering, the privilege, even, when I don't often think about like my privilege in spaces, right? Like you're fighting to like gain access to it when you also have privilege in that space too. But yeah, so that's what I was thinking about when you were talking.
Yeah, like I never want to like show up. Like a bunch of my friends wanted to go to Dyke March and I was like, cool, great. I will drop you off. Because like even though this is something that like 17-year-old me would have been like, hell, I had my handmade Ani DeFranco shirt. She was my second concert ever live. My first one was MCR. That was the kind of like little baby gay I was. That would have been so empowering for me as a younger person, and that space means a lot to me. I don't want to take it because I feel like I would be annoyed. That 17-year-old me, if I saw some like dude there, like I would feel like this is a space for me. Why are you intruding on it? And I guess Dyke March is different than like an activist, sort of. But like that I think principle kind of guides a lot of my hesitation around women's spaces. It's one of the reasons I'm grateful I wanted to attend a women's college. I'm glad I didn't. Not because I don't think that they're wonderful institutions, but because like my partner who went to one, she was like, yeah, I didn't want to be around men. And I'm like, that's fair. That's real valid. And like, yeah, I'm glad that I wasn't in your classes annoying the hell out of you by my presence.
Yeah. So as a trans man, then where do you find your place if you feel like you can't show up in some of these places that you would have gone as a 17-year-old? Kind of how do you find those places where you do feel like you belong?
Yeah, I mean that is the sort of like big question because I do often feel a little bit like a misfit no matter where I am, and I think some of that's just because everybody's always a misfit no matter where they are. Like we're never going to be able to fit comfortably everywhere. I think finding, I think my friends are huge. I think having a lot of my friends are trans of some flavor themselves. And I also think that there are little like nuances, right, in how spaces describe themselves that can kind of cue you into what are the kind of expectations for the space, what are the awareness around like trans identities in this space. I think like I would go to a meeting for queer people more than I would go to a meeting for like, you know, gays and lesbians, right? That distinction, I think, has meaning to me. And you know, it can be weird. I also I don't feel super comfortable in spaces for like gay men. As much as I can like talk Drag Race and all of those things, it's like the ways in which I experience objectification and like the kind of gaze on my body when I transitioned that I never did, being perceived as like a masculine of center lesbian or a masculine of center queer woman. And then I like, you know, I'm now being read as a gay man, and the kind of comments I got, I had this like moment of like, oh, straight women, wow, have it roll rough, like a kind of sympathy that I'd never really had because I hadn't experienced the male gaze in that way, or this is whatever. All of those things gaze. And so, yeah, it's tough. I think like looking for those little nuances, or I remember when I was looking into graduate programs, I asked like, is this a trans-friendly space? And people would say it's a queer-friendly space. And I'd say, that's not what I asked. Like those sorts of nuances and those sort of, I think, little cues, I think, and not to make generalizations about the community, but I think a lot of queer and trans people, because we're so used to like subtext and reading into subtext in order to kind of find our stories, because a lot of times it's just not text, that is changing. But a lot of times like queer and transness exist only as allegory, exist only as something you have to kind of dig into. I think that makes us maybe pretty good at, you know, when evaluating different ways that people talk about their communities. I think it makes it easier to kind of see through the subtle things that people do, how to kind of find a space that's going to feel comfortable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, like, who or what really has then played a significant role in your sexual and relationship journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. See, I did look at the questions in advance. I thought I had prepared, but then it was super hot and my head went empty. This often happens. I mean, beyond like, again, the L word, because that was unfortunately really like, that was sort of the be all end all.
Yeah.
Like I remember like being a 15, 16-year-old in my first relationship and like not knowing how any of the mechanics were supposed to work, because that's not what I was at, you know, you don't ever see that on TV. And I'm like watching the L word and like, okay, like what's going on? Of course, that was completely unrealistic. It's mostly straight people, like so stuff like that. But I think Tumblr, like the world of Tumblr and the like people I knew there who, you know, I had some like IRL queer and trans friends, but then like getting onto the internet and meeting other people in those spaces, I think just understanding that there were options outside of like what my parents had or whatever else in my neighborhood had. And I also think that experience I had as a teenager in politics, like how revolutionary it was to meet boring, everyday queer and trans adults. That's something every time I work with queer and trans youth, I'm like, put yourself in a space where you're surrounded by boring queer and trans adults. Because I didn't feel like I had any kind of picture or guide. Like everybody, you know, in high school, everybody's like, oh, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And it was just nothing. Like I couldn't tell you any, you know, I could say, I don't know, I want to be near a bookstore. Like I want to be in the city. I want to have a cat. That was it. Like I couldn't really envision what my day-to-day life would be like. And, you know, at 15 years old, being able to meet like a trans guy who's like happily married and really boring as hell, and all he wants to do is show you pictures of his dog. Like that was great. You know, is this because besides Max, the only other version of trans life I had was like boys don't cry. You know, so it's like, cool. You're either going to be like ostracized by your friends or, you know, raped and murdered as happens to Brandon Tina in real life as well as in the fictional film. So yeah, I think friends, Tumblr, but also really like just meeting boring adults and being able to like, obviously they weren't having explicit conversations with me, but just seeing the way that they lived their relationships and like, you know, hearing about like a coworker, Daryl, who's like, yeah, I'm going to go see my husband this weekend. And, you know, we're so excited to watch Grey's Anatomy. And like those sorts of things I think are really, really powerful for me.
Yeah. That you could picture your 10-year, like the vision of yourself for 10 years, and it could be whatever you wanted. It didn't have to be based in your identity.
Yeah, exactly. And also I could, or even more, I could just fill in the details of like, oh, you're a queer, you're not this like mystical, magical thing. You're like a human being who owns a couch and a television set. Like, you know, those sorts of like, again, really boring details.
Yeah. Now you're that boring example for
I'm so
students.
dull.
Yeah.
My GAs are like, oh, what'd you do this weekend? And I was like, oh, we watched, you know, Alex Garnishelli's new like cooking competition show and like went to Target. Really exciting. And they're like, oh, I went to Beyonce. Cool.
Well, that leads, I think, really well into our next question, which is, how has your understanding of pleasure evolved over time? And have you discovered like any new ways to prioritize and explore pleasure in your life?
Yeah, so I was on a focus group recently, about last year, talking about changes to NYU's healthcare plan. This is related, I promise. I'm going somewhere with this. And the kind of question we were asked are like, what changes can be made to like the sort of gender affirming care part of the healthcare plan? And I didn't have top surgery until last year. I delayed it for many, many years. And I mean, sidebar one, after having that, just simply not being in pain every day was, I think, and, you know, we talk about like gender affirming care. Yes, there's the like dysphoria side of it and like what it can mean to sort of no longer have a part of yourself that, you know, causes you that sort of psychic turmoil. You know, I'm not discounting that. But I think what sometimes people don't realize is that wearing a binder is physically very painful. I was in pain every single day of my life for close to 10 years. And so just being free of that was hugely like that, you know, my world opened up. Like, you know, it was no longer, you know, it wasn't like I'd get home, I'd take the binder off and now I'm done for the day. It was like, oh yeah, I can pop across the store, you know, to buy ice cream. Again, these sort of boring things that really weren't part of my life until after I had the procedure. And so because I'd been so focused on just whenever I looked at a health insurance plan, does it cover hormone replacement therapy and does it cover top surgery? Those are the only two things I ever cared about. And I'm sitting in this focus group and I'm sort of thinking like, yeah, Emily's got a great plan. You know, they pay for my top surgery, they pay for my hormones. It's not terrible. Like one grad program I almost went to, they would have paid for hormones, but you had to have the nurse inject your hormones for you every other week. So I was like,
and then that costs to go there for the injections.
Exactly. And I'm like, I'm not going to like, one, I've been doing this myself for 3 years at that point. I was like, I've been doing it for 10 years now. I'm not going to tether myself to a nurse. This is ridiculous. So I'm like, yeah, Emily got a great plan. This is wonderful. And I'm like listening to other people and they're asking for this, they're asking for that, they're asking for this. And I had never given myself permission to want those things. And so that really struck me of just how small I'd let my desire become and just, you know, the sort of bare minimum. And I was sitting there, I was like, I am so grateful for this bare minimum. And so now like, I saw now that the plan covers binders and I was like, where was this? Like I could have owned more than one binder at a time. That would have been, you know, they weren't that expensive, but when I was 19 years old living on $3,000 of federal loans a semester, like that $30 for a binder was food for a week. And so like imagining if that had been covered by insurance, imagining all of these other things that are now covered, I think a lot of my life since, you know, the last few years and actually attaining a little bit of financial security for the first time in a long time has been allowing myself to like not settle. And so, you know, to let myself want more than just like this tiny little thing I have told myself I'm allowed to want, which is real depressing. But, you know, it's a journey. We're all on a journey.
But I think really important for others to like take from that, right, is like you should demand more.
Yeah.
You know, have a voice. Your voice is, you know, powerful and you shouldn't just settle for the bare minimum.
Yeah. And again, I can tell my students this all day long.
Sometimes you have to learn it.
Doing it myself, it's a different story.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable sharing why you waited that long?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There were a few reasons. First was I was not super financially secure growing up. My family was, you know, like comfortable enough, but I like didn't really understand like what rich people was until college. And then I was like looking around. I'm from Michigan, right? It's cold in Michigan. We all need a coat. I'd never seen a Canada Goose coat.
Yeah.
And then I moved to New York City and I Google a Canada Goose coat. And I say, oh, that's like thousands of dollars. Okay. And so, you know, that kind of reframed how I saw my relationship to money. And so in college, it was simply a matter of like the only time I could take off was over the summer, and I had to work over the summer. And I couldn't, the kinds of jobs that I had were not the kinds where I could just be out of action for 4 to 6 weeks. So that was problem number one. Problem number two is when I finally left college and had a little bit more time that I could have maybe been flexible and was in graduate school, I was in Iowa. And I was like, who is going to take care of me? Because I love my roommates. They were not going to be able to take care of me. Like these were people who I had to like carry them, out of the bar. And, it was a writer town. It was in the middle of nowhere. All you had to do, all there was to do really was like drink beer and complain about each other's writing. And so I was like, okay, I don't have anyone to take care of me. And I also still don't have any money because I think I was making like 18 grand a year, which was nothing. And so the other part of it, I think, was I'd felt a lot of pressure to get top surgery very early. Like if you had told me at 19 when I first started hormone therapy that it would take me almost a decade to have top surgery, I would have been overcome. I would have been just so despondent and miserable because it feels very urgent. And I think in the trans community, and this is something that isn't maybe necessarily talked about as much, is there is this real pressure, I think, to conform to, especially if you're a trans man, especially if you're a white trans man, to very you have to cut your hair short. You have to act like a man. There are trans people who will yell at other trans people for being trans the wrong way. Just like every community, there are the terrible people in it. And so within these communities, I think there's this real emphasis on physical transition, and that's what proves that you're really trans. And there's a group of people, they call them, the sort of pejorative term is true scum. The longer term is transmedicalism. That basically says being trans is a medical diagnosis, and the cure to it is, hormone therapy and gender affirming surgery. I don't subscribe to this belief, but there's that pressure. And so what that pressure does, I think, is what it tells young trans people, especially who don't have access to surgery, who don't have access to hormone therapy, is, you are the wrong kind of trans unless you have this. And also these things will solve all of your problems with your body. And I knew that I had a lot of issues with my body that had absolutely nothing to do with the need for this surgery. And I wanted to be in a place where I was a little bit more mature to not expect that this procedure would fix everything, and to really understand the procedure for what it was, which was, this is going to mean I'm not going to have to wear a binder, so it's going to solve that problem. That's a huge problem. I mean, not having back knee, oh my God, what a revelation, because you're not wearing a tight spandex tube every day. It's going to solve that problem, it's going to solve this problem, but it's not going to solve these other problems. And I need to be able to, if not have those resolved, at least know that they're there and know what I need to do about them when it comes to body image. So that was the sort of other reason. And then, of course, unfortunately, there are not that many surgeons who I would say are excellent at gender affirming surgeries. I think there are a lot of surgeons who will perform it, but they don't, I think, take the time and care to really learn about the community. And I think they're seeing it as kind of a cash opportunity. And so for the ones who are really good, there's a wait list. I called June 2020. I got my intake in August of 2021. And then the surgery, she got me in for first available, which was March, the following March. Wow. So almost 2 years from the initial phone call. And I probably could have skipped the line because I knew people, but I was like, no, it's going to take. Also, I had to find a therapist to write me a letter, which I thought was stupid as hell. Yeah. And I found the Gallup.
That's not a requirement in NYU's policy. You need one letter, but it could be either medical or from a therapist.
That's for one or the employees? Or for students?
For students.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know about the employees.
Yeah. For employees, you do still need to have. I had one from my endocrinologist and then one from this therapist, and I was like, "This is so dumb. I could go get triple Ds, which would be way more life changing, for nothing. I could go get a face tattoo for nothing. Also, would be way more life changing. But for this, I have to have a therapist. But the Gallup Project, GALUP, it's maybe there are 2 L's. They do pro bono gender affirming letters. And that was how I was able to find someone. But that took months. And so that was the other reason, just the sort of logistics. And then, saving the money. I'm grateful that I was able to pay for it myself. I was mostly covered by insurance, and it hit my out of pocket for insurance.
Yes, but everything else is free.
Yes. So the rest of the year I was like, ooh, I'm going to go to this doctor. I'm going to go to this doctor.
I got free stuff coming.
I'm going to do this test. Yeah. But a lot of trans people have to crowdfund. Some of the better doctors don't take insurance, which is why I would never go to them. Because I'm like, I'm not going to spend 15 grand on this. But yes, there's all of that. And then there's also the weird politics of the aesthetics of it and the sort of question of it is plastic surgery and that kind of weird thing of is I think this is more of a conversation in trans feminine spaces, and especially when we think about facial feminization surgery and other things like that, where it's I have been trained to believe this is a life and death, life-saving procedure. And in some ways it is. And for some trans people it is. But also, like, why am I as a trans person not allowed to, like, want to be beautiful and, like, want to have, like, the best? Like, I used to joke, I was like, I'm spending this kind of money. I want designer titties. Like, I want to go to the best of the best. I did. Dr. Blue Bond Langner in New York City. She was great. She did Cello Man. You know, like, but, like, that weird feeling of, like, am I being frivolous? Like, that was something else I kind of had to combat. And I think a lot of trans people, there is that weird line of, like, shouldn't we be allowed to, like, want to be beautiful too, and have that not set us back in terms of our civil rights, which is, you know, thank you, United States of America, for giving all of us that horrible mind situation to be in. I'm
glad that you got in, and I also hear that. I mean, we have other doctors now that we refer our students to, but it is all of them have long wait lists, and and, like, unfortunate.
There are other doctors. I'm not saying that the other doctors with short wait lists are bad by any means. I haven't done my research, but, like, I do think it's undeniable that certain doctors really care and really understand their community. Like, the doctor I went to only works with trans people, and then there are doctors who I think see it as, like, another way to make money, and, like, you know,
yeah. Well, I also hear you, like, thinking about all of the different complications that come up just in life along the way. Like, really sort of thinking about, if you come from a family who doesn't have a ton to spend that much money, like, that really resonated with me. Just like, like, I sometimes forget that I'm financially stable. You're like, I can spend the money on these things that are, you know, going to benefit me and I'm going to get pleasure out of.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah. It always felt like that $2,000 should, like, when I was younger, it was like, well, this has to go to my education. Like, you know, I had a student contribution as part of my financial aid package. And while I had a very generous financial aid package, paid all of my tuition, some of my room and board, you know, any amount of money, like, my parents were able to contribute to the rest of my room and board through, like, they had like a 529, but they couldn't give me that money. So if I wanted money for books, if I wanted money for travel, or for anything that wasn't from a dining hall, it was like, if I don't spend my money that I've earned over the summer on that, that's more loans I'm taking out. And so it was like, yes, of course my education needs to come first, even though, again, being physically in pain all day makes it hard to sit in a lecture hall.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate that you highlighted that, you know, trans care is individualized. And I think that we're trying to push that a lot more here at NYU, and saying that, like, everybody has different needs. Some people want surgery, some people want hormones, some people want facial feminization surgery, some people want hair removal, other places, like, but it's not the same for everybody.
Absolutely.
And so you could have 5 trans men or 5 trans women that have all different kinds of treatment plans, and I think that should be the norm, and people should not be telling them they're wrong.
It's also really kind of shocking that it's not already, because I feel like everything else is, like, I walk into, and it's my privilege, I walk into, you know, a doctor's office, I would hope that I get the individual care and not just like, you have this, you know, thing, then everyone's going to be the same, right? You know, like, I have some dermatology issues that were coming up, and I'm really frustrated because I'm like, my doctor's just kind of giving me, like, the standard stuff, and I'm like, something's not working.
Yeah.
Like, the standard treatment's not working for me. Like, I feel like you're not giving me the individualized care. You're just sending me new prescriptions. Yes. And just throwing a new prescription at it. I feel like, see me as an individual.
Yeah. No, I this was in grad school, but I was asked to be on this, like, trans health panel, which was wild because I was there to just give, like, a writing workshop. Like, it was like a cute little, like, queer writing workshop, whatever. And then they, like somebody dropped out of this panel, and they were like, well, otherwise, if we don't do it, there won't be any trans people on this panel. And I was like, so otherwise, my only qualification is just having a body and being a trans person. They were sort of like, well, yeah. And I was like, I mean, yeah, there should be a trans person on this panel. So I'm sitting there, and there's this, like, cis guy doctor, super well-meaning. This is also in Iowa. So, like, the sort of political context is a little bit different there, even though it was prior to all of these laws. And I remember a bunch of teenagers. It was like 14 to 16-year-olds. And some students are talking, you know, you can't really access gender affirming care when you're that age in most of the country. And so they're talking about, like, maybe getting on hormones, stuff like that. And this doctor's like, yeah, we'll transition all of you. And I was like, you know, like, it's also okay. Like, I actually had to say it. I was like, it's okay if you need to wait. And I'm glad that I waited to have top surgery. It's also because, you know, it wasn't just necessarily my chest I had dysphoria about, but there are other parts of my body that the binder helped me feel better about. And, like, having top surgery, like, an adjustment after top surgery was dealing with those parts of my body that, like, I no longer wear a binder to deal with. And I have the emotional maturity to do that now at almost 30. Would I have had it at 15? No! And so being able to kind of be like, again, a boring adult and just say like, hey, I've lived through this and it's okay to wait, or it's okay to like do this. Like, don't feel like, because there's this one size fits all.
Yeah.
I don't want you to ever feel like you have to go to a doctor and the doctor says, so we're going to follow the transition plan. And you get, it's like, that's really not the case.
Yeah.
Dermatology also. It's like, no, you would you would think with dermatology in particular, since everybody has a different skin type, that they would know.
My doctor listens to this. We're going to transition to a little bit of a different topic now, but what does a healthy relationship mean to you, and how did you discover this on your own?
Yeah, definitely. I think communication is the sort of the cornerstone of it. And so not just the presence of communication, but also really feeling like you were able to communicate. That, I think, is a sign of a healthy relationship, right? Like, I've been in relationships or friendships where I feel like if I speak up, the relationship or friendship will end. And that, I think, red flags we ignored, right? Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it. I also think, being with someone who sees you the way, like, the best version of yourself, not necessarily like somebody who like doesn't see your flaws, but who celebrates you for like the weird things about you, if that makes sense, or like, who can kind of be there with you for that, like, person you want to become or that person you're becoming, as opposed to people, because I think there are some people who just want to tear each other down and who are just like really negative. So I think, it's not to say that you have to like, again, be with somebody who's going to like delusionally, be like, yeah, you're, 5'8", you can play in the NBA, like nothing like that. But like being with someone who's really excited for the things that excite you about yourself, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, it was a lot of trial and error, though. Like, it wasn't like I was able to like, oh, yeah, this is how it is. I had to go through some not great experiences to get there, I think, as a lot of people do.
Yeah. I think that's how we test our boundaries. We figure out, like, really important, valuable things sometimes when we fail and when we fall flat. But I think so many of our students are so afraid to fail or so afraid to, like, do anything that's going to be perceived as a failure. And it's like, I wish I could just tell you, shake you. You're going to learn so much. I don't want you to like fail and never get up. But I'm like, you fail, you look back, you're like, I learned so much from that.
And also how we see relationships that end as like these colossal failures. Yeah. And I just think that's really not true.
Such a negative social norm that we like have, like, if we get a divorce or, if we like end a relationship, then I'm a failure. Right. And that's not true. Like, hopefully you've learned something from that. Hopefully you've gained something positive and you can move forward, right? And take the positive into a new relationship. Because we always think, I have this baggage. Yeah. And it's like, well, think of it as positive baggage. It's the Louis Vuitton bag that you're taking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, my partner and I are in, conversation about getting married soon. Unfortunately, part of it is brought on by like dumb bureaucracy. It turns out if I put her on my insurance as a domestic partner, I get taxed on the value of the insurance that NYU pays.
But not if you're married.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, I am not like the notion of marriage is something I'm a little lukewarm on. But like the legal benefits are undeniable. And of course, it's not the commitment that I'm worried about. But like that was a conversation we were having. And she was like, well, I think we should probably get a prenup because we want to assume that like, we're going to try and keep choosing each other. But if things don't work out that way, let's, while we love and care about each other, establish how this relationship may, no longer continue in this way while we still feel this way about each other. And I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's very mature.
Well, just a good perspective. I think we're always talking about wanting to think about definitions and have conversations in advance before you have them, just like we were talking about before conflict. First, second date, like, let's talk about how you manage conflict because it's going to happen. Let's talk about what kind of sex you want to have because hopefully it'll happen, maybe not. But like, I want to make sure we're a good fit before we get into that bedroom or that, public bathroom. I don't know. whatever.
Park bench, wherever
floats your boat.
Yeah, exactly.
So, to talk about like a prenup, hey, like, let's hope this is going to work out, but like, let's also be realistic that, half of marriages end in divorce. So like, let's just be realistic. And I love that you're doing it while you love and care for someone.
Yeah, I think, also we had just watched like Marriage Story. Okay. So that was it was like, okay, Adam Driver punching a wall. Let's not, I don't ever want to like see myself in that.
For sure. Are there any cultural or religious beliefs that have influenced your views on sex and relationships? And, how do you navigate that tension that might arise?
Yeah. So I think as I said earlier, I did not grow up terribly religious. My mom had me baptized, and I kind of asked her about it later, and she was like, just in case. That was the I was like, I don't think that's how it works. I will say something with respect to religion. Because I didn't grow up religious, I, as a queer person, had a lot of, I think, feelings of anger toward the religious community. And so something I had to kind of unlearn was meeting, other people who were queer, who had identities that I shared, who did have faith or spirituality, and kind of pushing past or being able to see that outside of my kind of criticism of the church or of kind of organized religion and the way that I think it does enact sort of unhealthy things, and really being able to not be a little asshole, frankly, which is what I was. My first partner in college, they had grown up in this really affirming, nurturing religious environment. And while they also shared my criticisms of organized religion and of the church, me being a little snot about their religious background was not a good thing for our relationship. And so that was something I've had to kind of learn and be able to see faith and see spirituality in that more kind of nuanced way. I think some of what I internalized when I was younger were sort of Midwestern puritanical values. Grew up in Michigan. It's as much as we were always screaming at each other, there's also a lot that's unsaid and very passive, and expecting other people to pick up on those cues, especially my parents would scream at each other, but I don't think they necessarily would talk about certain things because they maybe expected oh, well, I did this thing. How did you not know that meant? Even though if this thing was a certain way of polishing my glasses, or to give an example of the sort of passivity, if my mom, and I'm home rarely, but if I'm home and I want to go out and see a friend and my mom is mad about that, she won't give me an earful you would expect, not you would expect, but a lot of moms would. She'll just say, oh. And within that "oh" contains, years of disappointment and everything I've ever done wrong.
I'm having an activation right now.
Yeah.
I'm from Kansas.
Yeah,
I
right.
get you.
Right. And so for me, I think those are things that I unconsciously replicate in my relationships. And, I will do or say something and expect my partner to know exactly what I mean. And she's like, I am from the Bay. I am very, she's like, I will tell you exactly what I want and don't want. And I don't understand. What are you doing? I don't know what this means. And so I think that was something I really had to oh, no, you do have to, you can't just count on this shared cultural understanding or this shared, sort of shorthand, because it's not going to get you very far.
Yeah. Well, and Michigan is very Dutch Reformed. That's kind of
Calvin College,
yes,
Hope College.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially my part of the state.
Yeah, and so those things, even if you weren't actively going to a church or anything like that, it's kind of seeped in the whole community, and how education is taught, sex ed programs, messages that you're getting, and so that probably got in somewhere, even if you weren't getting it from home or intentionally going places to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in high school, I was rereading my mother decided she was sick of my stuff being all over the house, which is fair. I did move out, more than a decade ago, but she was like, you need to get everything out. And I was like, okay, fair. She's like, I'm making this into a guest room. It's going to be cute. And I was like, fine. So I'm going through my old journals, and I was really angry in high school because even though, again, my mom isn't terribly religious, she was afraid for me to be this out queer kid. And so there were lots of little things that she would do and say to make me my high school girlfriend was my friend, those sorts of things. And I think a lot of queer people can relate to the experience of being someone's friend, especially around family. And so, yeah, absolutely. And I think I didn't feel shame about myself, but I did feel anger at everyone else. And that was something else that was kind of hard to get rid of as I grew up, that those feelings of just being mad at my mom for making me feel that way, and being able to kind of we got into a huge blowout fight in the American Apparel in Ann Arbor in 2009 because I wanted one of those stupid legalized gay shirts, which are so tacky. It is deeply embarrassing that I bought one, but I wanted to buy one, and she was like, I don't think you want to advertise that. And I got so mad. I bought two. And I ran out of the store. Yeah. And she was right to tell me not to buy one because it was a bad shirt and nobody should, wear them. But I felt so angry with her. And it took me many, many years to recognize that she was terrified that I was going to get bullied, and she was doing her best to keep me safe. And I think the things that she did were not things that were affirming or supportive, but it didn't come from a place of like rejecting me. It came from a place of her seeing the world that she lived in and being afraid for her kid. And that perspective took me a long time to develop. And it was like years of being very kind of careful about how I talked about my life with my family. And I still am so I'm just like, small example, I was just on vacation with them. There were these hilarious stickers. So we went to a place called Sleeping Bear Dunes, beautiful National Lake Shore. Maybe don't visit because then there are a lot of people there, and like, it's best that it's not a lot of people. But there's this hilarious sticker. It's got a bunch of bears, like gay men, like bears sleeping, and it said Sleeping Bear Dunes. And I was like, this is hysterically funny. So I bought the sticker. My mom was like, what's that? Why are there men on the sticker? I was like, Mom, you straight people, like straight people humor just is not,
Went over her head.
Yeah.
How do you navigate the intersectionality of your identities within the context of sex and relationships?
Yeah, I mean, like thinking about my own experiences, I am always, I think, very aware that there are things that I don't have access to as a personal experience. And I try to be really conscious of that in my intimate relationships, but also in my like friendships and things like that. Trying to have that knowledge of like, I don't know what XYZ thing is like. And that's information I need to know that I don't know. I think that's the most, again, I do trainings for a living, so forgive me if I lapse into training speak, but, knowing what you don't know or knowing that you don't know, I think is the best way to avoid maybe stumbling into problematic behaviors. And so that's something I try to carry with me, and making sure that I'm not presuming or making assumptions based on experiences I can't have. It is weird though, like you go from being this like angry queer punk woman to being like perceived as a straight cis guy. And a straight white cis guy. And so having all of this power and access to power that I didn't sort of have any like life experience having until I was an adult is something that I struggle with constantly, right? It's a very weird position to be in. It's like you wake up and you're a boring straight white guy. That's horrifying. Like, that's like really, it is kind of scary. And so thinking about how I can, understand that and understand this power I have access to, and also understanding too that I am still a person who is vulnerable and still marginalized in specific ways. And like a concept that I'm interested in is this idea of like conditional privilege, right? In that I have access to all of this power, but there are certain lines where I don't. And so being able to both understand the ways in which I am marginalized, but also understand how the way that I am seen and the way that I move through the world does not necessarily square with that marginalization. What does that sort of specific kind of vulnerability manifest as, and how does that, impact how I see the world? But yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. And especially as a white person who does the work that I do, trying to really be aware of where my personal experience is an asset, and also where I need to learn more, and I need to be intentional about seeking out information I don't have access to. So something that I constantly try to do is, I'll read books about like disability studies, or I'll, seek out narratives from people whose experiences I don't share, so that when I'm doing my work, or when I'm just like approaching other human beings, I'm not letting the sort of cultural soup shorthand come out. I'm able to kind of substitute that cultural soup, all of those other biases that we swim around in, with real concrete things, or I'm at least aware that I need to have that filter there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how often do you talk about sex in general? And then who do you have those conversations with?
As a queer person, I feel like it comes up quite a bit. Like all of my friends, I love my friends. They're all in like the cute little polycules and all these other things. So it's like, oh, so-and-so just had a threesome with this person who was kind of famous. And like, there's a lot of that in the group chat. Like the queer writing and art community is surprisingly small. And so to be like, oh, so-and-so had an affair with that, so like there's a lot of like that happens in my day to day. Or just like, I think that like, the queer media and tends to be a little bit more sexually explicit. Like I was actually just talking to my colleagues today. There's this show on YouTube Questing Queens. It's 4 of the drag race girls. It's Bob, Monet Exchange, Alaska, and Jujubee, and they're playing D&D. And there's this like hilarious little bit where like there's a chipmunk who's also a character in the thing, and anyway he grabs poppers, and like I was I was using this as an example to describe the humor of this show, and I was like, wow, yeah, queers do love talking about sex, but like so like there's that. Then also with my partner, in like fun ways, but also in more like, we'll set aside time if we need to kind of have those conversations, so that we can make sure that we're still on the same page and that we're still, doing well in that regard.
I think that's huge what you just said. You guys have been together for 8 years and you still sit down and have those conversations. I think that's important for everybody to know that, that it's still important to have those conversations. You can't just have one conversation at the very beginning and think that that's going to cover you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's like, can you imagine like wanting all of the same things you wanted at 21? Like my body doesn't move in all of the same ways that it moved in when I was 21, right? Or like I didn't have access to like a bed that was larger than a twin XL when I was 21. Those, I think it's super important. And important to have those conversations in a deeply unsexy setting, right? When you're in a coffee shop or at the uncomfortable chairs at the dinner table because you can't afford the cute chair, because I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of it.
Yeah. So in what ways do you prioritize self-care in your sexual and intimate relationships? And, how does that impact your overall well-being?
Yeah. So I am... I'm a fake extrovert, I like to say. Like I am, I think, pretty good at performing a level of extroversion, especially as part of my job. That is, like, I'm. If you let me to my own devices, I am like a gremlin. I just want to be in the dark with a book, watching TV all day. I'd be perfectly happy like that. And so for me, because of my work is very like I have to be around people all day. I need a lot of alone time, and so that was a kind of boundary I had to really navigate with my partner of being like, look. I don't want to be a monster to you, but like when I get too much, I shut down. And so something that a kind of a compromise, because again, we were stuck in a tiny box together for 3 years during COVID. Both of us were working from home. We had to kind of negotiate like, what does that look like? And so sort of, something that she has kind of grown to accept, even though she hates the smell, is the nails. I'm doing my nails every week. And like I don't do my nails in the living room. I like go to my desk, I open the window, I've got my little fan, I've got my like dual monitor setup, I've got my increasingly large collection of polishes next to me, my little swatch wheels, and I like that's something that for me is really helpful to just take that time. And it's funny because people are always asking like, oh, you must love doing your partner's nails. You must love doing it. I don't want to do anybody else's nails. Like I know people are like, oh my God, you must be so good. You can make money. No, I don't want to do anyone else's nails. This is something I do for me. It gives me joy. I don't want to have to worry about what color you like or don't like. I want to wear what I want to wear. And so that I think is the main thing that I do for myself, and like setting that time aside or being able to kind of communicate like, hey, I need this space, or hey, I need to do this or that thing. But I mean, it's tough. I don't know. I don't know what y'all are doing in this pandemic Lovato as it continues.
Yes, love that term.
But yeah.
I play volleyball. That's something that like really gives me a lot of community, but also like a physical outlet sometimes. But then I also love to read. I'm also a little bit like introverted, extroverted, kind of walk the line. And I definitely need my alone space. Yeah.
Yeah, my husband and I both identify as extroverts, but we realized during the pandemic, him more so than me. I would still like to get out and see friends, but he was like, I just need you. You're a person. So you fill my extroverted space. And so I think even like as we transition back into whatever this real world is now these days, I think like we still enjoy just hanging out, the two of us, but and it is a lot more effort to get out and go and do things. And we're trying to be more intentional about getting out, and even if it's just the two of us getting out of the house and going and doing things. But I really like the outdoors. It sucks that it's so hot in the summer. But walking was a lot. Like during the pandemic, we walked so much around our neighborhood.
We got really into the WNBA this year.
I went to my first game this past weekend.
Oh my God, wait, was the Liberty versus, did you see them here?
Yeah, the Storm.
Oh, that was a tight game.
It was.
Too. It should not have been that tight.
I know.
Yeah, that was, I watched that on TV. I was at the Mercury game 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So that having that thing, and also it's easy because we live in Brooklyn, 2 stops away.
Nice.
And so that was also like, being able to get out of the house, and like it's also not that expensive, frankly. To go see like a ball game, and it feels like I'm like, ooh, I'm around all these other queer people, but I get to sit in my own little section. I get to yell a lot. You know, it could be, that kind of like cathartic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's great. So we're at our last question. So what does good sex mean to you?
Oh, that is a tough. I don't know. It shouldn't be a tough question, but I do feel like it is. I don't know. I think it's any kind of sex that you learn from. You feel like you're. I don't like to use this word because it's ableist, but like seen, right? Like really seen. I feel like, and it does not have to be with a long-term partner. You can have a one-time hookup where you have that experience. But I think that for me is the most important thing, where you don't feel like you're performing. You know, where you feel like you could just be, and what that mechanically looks like does not matter. But I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And so we have come to the end. We're very grateful that you came today and shared so much with us, and appreciate your vulnerability and your ability to share. Are there, I mean, obviously you have these workshops through OGI or CMEP?
Kind of both. Frankly, you would think I would know which one I take. I sit in CMEP. So if you want to come say hi to me at NYU, I'm also a courtesy meals provider. I physically sit in the CMEP offices. It's Kimmel 806. So the workshops, I think some are like CMEP branded, some are OGI branded. It's all okay. The education team is me and my supervisor. We do all of it.
So how do people find the workshops?
You can, for the public facing ones, you can just go, if you go into like NYU learning opportunities or NYU OGI learning opportunities, you'll find our kind of public sessions. And then you can also either reach out to us at ogi.training. If you want to come do a private or a custom session, we also have a form on the Learning Sessions website. You can fill it out and say like, we've done everything from like microaggressions to anti-bias to if you've got some funky situation, I love the like weird ones. So I'm happy to come up with some sort of solution to whatever training you do have. Otherwise, you can email us directly. Again, there are two of us. So you can just look me up in the directory. I am there.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I have seen the page there with your lovely bio.
Yeah, and my headshot that's from 2015. I need to get a new headshot. Yeah, that was my partner actually took that photo.
It's a beautiful photo.
That's when we first met. Yeah, and I hated it at first, and clearly it grew on me because it's still my bio photo.
Are there other places outside of NYU that you'd be willing to connect with folks, or places that you write for regularly? People could read your things? It
has been a minute since I need to like start submitting materials, but if you want to follow my nail art Instagram, it's I hope I remember the handle. It's at thesearemy_nails.
Excellent.
I could not come up with a name, so I was like, okay, these are my nails, and I post on that like once a week with my manicure.
With your new updated weekly manicure.
I've already planned out the Barbie nails. I've got tickets to the Barbie movie. I've got a neon pink, a pastel pink, and a holographic pink. We're going to do a cute little geometric design.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. That's something I look forward to every weekend.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I just want to say, like, I really appreciate as well, like, the vulnerability. I connected with you in ways that, I don't think that I would have assumed. So it's just always nice. I love that, like, I get to have these conversations with people from all over the university and be able to connect on different things. It's such a nice, part of this whole like podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
If you have questions about the podcast or anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us at goodsex.podcast@nyu.edu. This email address is monitored during business hours and may take 3 to 4 days for follow-up. We are definitely open to critical and thoughtful feedback, as we didn't cover everything in this episode and might have said something that was inaccurate or that had a negative impact on someone. If you have questions about your sexual health and are an NYU student, you can connect with our Student Health Center sex expert at sexpert@nyu.edu or schedule an appointment through the Student Health Center portal. Look at our show notes for additional information and resources, including organizations, articles, books, and videos.
If you have urgent mental health concerns, safety issues, or you are worried that someone might have caused harm to you, or that you might have caused harm to someone, then you can contact NYU's Confidential Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999. Chat with them using their mobile app or email them at wellness.exchange@nyu.edu. For anyone, NYU or non-NYU listeners, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or the National Mental Health Hotline. Simply dial 988 from anywhere in the U.S.
Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode where we continue to talk about good sex at NYU. Subscribe to the podcast to hear all of our quickies and interviews with NYU community members. Thanks to our content contributors for this episode, Bernadette Kerr, Alyssa LaFosse, Dr. Dominic Baini-Amisa, Zoe Raguzios, and to our health promotion team, Anna Genova, Jenny Mellum, Parade Stone, and Arna Dixit, and to Gotham Studios and Karen Ortman.